Well, welcome, divas and dudes, to Powerhouse Bakery. I'm Suzanne Ryman, and we are talking about food additives. I alluded to this last week if you were here, and we have just finished up a whole series on gut biome. So I figured out a really fun segue because as I was looking at different food additives, I realized that fermented foods really is kind of the old-fashioned approach to preserving foods, adding flavor and texture, and even helping the gut biome. So sadly, as you know, the Americans got smarter and we were more busy and running around doing things, taking our kids to 5 different events and having 2 jobs and who knows what else to make our schedule so busy, we allowed the food industry to do our food processing rather than the home cook. And so I thought it was a perfect way to really show you where we've come. And so in the next few weeks, I'm going to do added research, and we're going to learn about different food additives and really how does our legislation intersect with our health and food additives, and what kind of regulations do we have that protect us? Because so often consumers don't think of it. They just grab something off the shelf and they eat it because it tastes good, or they buy it because it's called for in a recipe, or they are trying to mimic something they saw at a restaurant. So all of those are, of course, not ways to guarantee getting a healthy choice. And it's perfect because I grabbed this product. It's called Chow Chow. Didn't really even read the label. I've honestly never even had Chow Chow, but it kind of piqued my interest because we were doing gut biome. And I got home with it and I'm looking at it, and wouldn't you know, it has food colors that are food additives that are not recommended. So I was like, wow, how did I get so perfect serendipity? But I'm going to really show us what is going on with this product, what are the ingredients in it that are troublesome, and then I got here on my table a recipe for Chow Chow. Anybody ever make it? Yes! Okay, good. So you know that it's pretty simple ingredients. It's considered a relish. You can have 2 different kinds of Chow Chow. One would be fermented, which is what I'm going to show you, and one could also be pickled. So when you think of traditional relishes, if you buy off the counter, or off the shelf, most of them will be not fermented, they'll be pickled. And that's just for ease. Of course, a vinegar is in fact fermented, but there's some ways to really create the different nuances of fermenting that really do have a lot of beneficial properties. In fact, when I was reading about Chow Chow and different fermentation processes, one YouTuber, and you'll have to check on this and make sure it's actually true, mentioned that even if you can't use organic products, the fermentation process, because of the good bacteria, actually cleanses the foods and takes out some of the potential pesticides and herbicides and not so clean ingredients on your non-organic ingredients. So I'd be curious if any of you have heard that, and if so, we'll validate. But let's suffice to say that the fermentation process, the whole goal is to kill a lot of the bacteria and only let a few of them grow. And so that again is where we're going to really learn. And including things like salt and tannins are really valuable in helping to ferment the foods without them getting mushy, keep certain flavors while other flavors are kind of discouraged from being grown and proliferating in your vegetables. So let's get started. So really, food additives, are they safe to eat? We're going to look at the science of food and what is hidden in our foods. If we think about food additives, we think of potentially bad ingredients. It kind of has a bad connotation, right? So we have organizations like the FDA that's supposed to keep its citizens safe. We also have the USDA. So governmental agencies, theoretically, we have enough um, layers that are supposed to protect the consumer. But what you're going to find is generally regarded as safe is this term, this industry term, that really makes it very much a gray area when we look at agencies that regulate whether or not a food is healthy or not. It depends on, of course, research. And how do we know that the research is valid? So the FDA will tell you it looks like research is unequivocally showing that this food is not good. And the USDA might go, yeah, well, you know what? The industry over here that really pays our puts money in our pockets, I'll say, doesn't want you to put the fact that maraschino cherries have red number 40 that have been known to be problematic. And so maraschino cherry company stamps their feet and says, no, we don't think that's a problem. FDA starts to squirm a little bit, and the USDA as well, because they're trying to support the farmer, and this company is, grandfathers of grandfathers. And so there's all this good old boy network that makes it very difficult for science to be able to have the final say over what is really going to be in the plates or in the hands of our citizens eating. And then we have the Center for Science in the Public Interest. So this is like a watchdog group that doesn't have any vested interest in the food industry. It is in fact a grassroots lobbyist. So they're the people that go to Washington and stamp their feet and say, wait a minute, this body of evidence says that this is something that people should be aware of, at least make an informed decision, right? And so anybody know what product CSPI was really pivotal in getting out of foods for the most part back in the 80s? Trans fats. And so this is a product that was made by the food industries, and their goal was to have a product that had great texture, good shelf life, as far as mouthfeel, depending on what product it goes in. Trans fats were the win-win. You could start with a very inexpensive oil. You could hydrogenate the fat, make it creamy and solid at room temperature, and it would hold really well in these different products and make a great item that would last on the shelf and pretty much indefinitely and give a creamy texture. But we started seeing that no, trans fats actually are a very big contributor to what? Cardiovascular disease. And so when the health enthusiasts, so this is really interesting too, the physicians and doctors are busy treating people. So their business is not to see why people get sick, right? I mean, job security, if nothing else, says we're just going to focus on keeping people as unsick as possible. So mortality, not morbidity rates, is what the doctors care about. And of course, there's lots of doctors that will teach you how to eat healthy, but let's just face it, most of them do not focus on that. They focus on the latest technology for opening your heart and putting in new valves and giving you new medicine so that you love them for you now being cured because of their expertise, right? So who is it that helps the people understand what foods are going to prevent cardiovascular disease, not just treat a disease once we already get it? And that's an area where honestly our industry is kind of lacking. And so what's fun is, in the last at least 10 years, probably more, there has been more and more information given to the public. The Center for Science in the Public Interest is a really good group that now is looking at being an advocate for people. They really do grab the body of evidence, and they really do help folks understand what to look for, what questions to ask, and it's been around for 50 years. So it's been a long time in the industry and really helping people. So if you've never heard of Centers for Science in the Public Interest, they do an awesome little newsletter. Anybody ever heard of CSPI? Yes. Nutrition Action Newsletter. Nutrition action. So even when I was in college, so they had a great offering. So it was always very relevant. It always looked at new products out there. It helped us as the consumer. It wasn't written for the scientist. It wasn't written for the federal government or the physician. It was really nicely tailored to the common reader that, hasn't studied a ton about nutrition, but really cares about what they're eating. So I love the fact that they're available. And they have lots of proof, meaning science research that backs their information, which, is important for all of us. Because honestly, there are some foods that are just not good for you. And sometimes it's more obvious than other times. If you get a big bacon double cheeseburger with fries and a drink that's bright blue, you're probably not looking for the healthiest meal, right? And it was so funny. In the earlier class, one of the ladies showed me a picture, just came on her phone while we were speaking. Her granddaughter was 4. Granddaughter was given a little breakfast sandwich. And it was a rainbow of colors that matched her shirt. And here we are talking about, how colors in foods can sometimes be not the best choice. Now, colors in foods, when you see bright red bell peppers or yellow bell peppers, even the bay leaves that are rich in tannins when we do our fermenting, there's colors that come from nature that are very great sources. So we always say, eat the colors from the rainbow. And we always say, the brighter the colors, the better. And that is always because of those polyphenols and the phytoestrogens and the antioxidants, the anthocyanins, all those fancy terms that you get to riddle off at a dinner party. But let's suffice to say that God made these foods to be rich in colors so we would be attracted to them. So when we start looking at foods that are bright blue, we have to kind of wonder. And at restaurants, they're not in the business for giving us health foods, right? We know that. Restaurants are not in the business of getting us healthy. Restaurants are in the business for really tapping into your love for what I call food cocaine, which is high fat, high salt, high sugar, high crunch. And we also know that the eyes eat first. We love bright, interesting colors, even if they're neon blue. But interesting that even when you're looking at labels, sometimes it's hard to identify what those ingredients are. I mean, some of them are so hard to read, not only that they're small print, even if you have glasses, but you can't pronounce the words because they're so long, right? And so sometimes we just don't even want to know. We'll just buy a product. That's totally me. I bought this product and didn't even think of checking the label. And I thought it was interesting that this is really touted as an old-fashioned food. They got a cute little granny on the side here. They got her story about pioneering flavors. And then as you go a little farther, again, reading the fine print, it has cabbage, water, distilled vinegar, sugar, onions, sweet red peppers, salt, spices, guar gum, dextrose, artificial flavors, turmeric, alum, red dye number 40. Ding, 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 ding. I mean, really? This is green. Why did it need red dye number 40? And if we know how to make vegetables, we would never have needed red dye. It also has green and blue number 1 and yellow number 5. So, I mean, wow. And so again, if we don't know what to look for, or we're spoofed into thinking it's a healthy, wholesome food, we really, as consumers, can't rely on the FDA or the USDA, really. They are just fragmented, we'll say, in their priorities. And of course, CSBI is a really great ambassador for us and a healthy, but when it boils down to it, the best ticket is for us to know and to be informed as much as we can. And so today I want to talk about synthetic dyes, and you can see this beautiful color. Anybody recognize this? Fruity Pebbles. Has anybody ever eaten Fruity Pebbles? Yeah, right? Just like that little girl that I mentioned where her, her, I guess, parent was giving her the breakfast sandwich that had pink and purple and green and yellow in this thing she was eating. It kind of looked like a bagel, but I'm telling you, it had the rainbow of colors. It was very scary. So when we have a food that has some frank health concerns, like these colors, these dyes, one way to be kind of a tip off, I guess you could say, is that when we have colors that are this, we'll say unnatural, they typically are found in junk food, kind of junk food. Treat foods maybe is a better panacea, right? It's a better euphemism. It's a treat. And granted, when we think of foods that are generally recognized as safe, if you only have them as a once-in-a-year treat, then maybe you are fine. Now, some research has really warned that some children, or even some adults, but some people are super sensitive to these different products, and it causes behavior problems. Well, now, with you being equipped with the information we've been going over about biome, we know that what we eat does, in fact, affect our brain chemistry, without a doubt. You can eat a breakfast or skip a breakfast and have a difference of how you're feeling later. We know that. So it only makes sense that food additives are definitely going to have an impact on how we feel in the short term, and maybe even when you have treat over treat over treat, long term it can affect our overall health. Let's hope that it doesn't really cause cancers, but some of the evidence is showing that it very well can. Thyroid cancer is one of them. And so as I go through, look at the colors here. The blue, 1 and 2, the citrus 2, the green 3, they all have just, letters and numbers to identify them. Some of these are still kind of in the category of the evidence is not clear. So who's going to do the research? Who's going to pay a lab to really test these colors? We know that in a market-driven economy, someone's going to have it a value to get this information, right? We hope that it's the watchdog governments that will help make sure that the people are safe. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen nearly enough. So, not enough research to really unequivocally tell us if these colors are safe or not. And then number 2, we have to make sure that somebody is understanding the research and being able to share it fairly with everybody and get it into the labels as much as we can. And so again, we've got a long way to go, but CSPI and other watchdog groups are definitely helping us. So when we think of synthetic colors and chemicals, it might surprise you that they are actually petroleum based. And so when we think back on the trans fats, in all fairness, trans fats do occur occasionally in nature. Not in very high quantities, and usually it'll be with other fats. But when we have a synthetically made product that is put in foods for texture variation, or in this case trying to make fatty foods more creamy in these different chemical ingredients, it definitely starts to rack up in our body system as being potential carcinogens. So petroleum based, we don't want those in our body, right? And so, as I mentioned with this product, they really cheated because they made us think that this was a super healthy product. And, I kind of went over the labels. But what I thought was interesting is on the label, it talks about as a big call out. Remember, we know what call out means. It's something that the label wants you to know because it's trying to tell you it's healthy. It says no high fructose corn syrup, right? Right? Isn't that funny? So just like trans fats, high fructose corn syrup was considered, the black sheep, the very bad thing that we had to avoid. And so, at all costs, it was taken out of foods. High fructose corn syrup. Now, again, we're going to put on our science cap and think about this. Fructose. What exactly is wrong with fructose? And, even when my boys were little and this was the big thing, I always let them buy foods. I let them pick stuff out, and I would give them a list of requirements. And one of them was it can't have any high fructose corn syrup and it can't have any trans fats. So they would, read labels and figure things out. Hey, look, Mom, this has no HCSF. But as I got a little farther down the line, I'm like, well, listen, what is so bad about it? Any guesses? Sugar itself, especially from fructose, isn't a bad chemical like something from petroleum-based products. What made high fructose corn syrup such a bad guy is it was a liquid, and it became a great filler. It was put in so many things. And so when we read this, granted, it doesn't have high fructose corn syrup, but did you notice it has dextrose and sugar and one more, guar gum. So thickeners, fillers, and sugar in two different terms. Dextrose, another term for sugar. And then it said, yeah, we got sugar. Now, the trick is when you have sugar written in different terms, they're slightly different chemicals, but they're going to do the same thing. They're going to say, want some more food cocaine, right? Because it's high in sugar. High fructose corn syrup, this little acronym, for a long time, people didn't really notice. And it started giving us more and more and more sugar. It was in so many things. It was a great filler. And who doesn't like sweet? Everybody likes sweet. So it started going into all kinds of things. Pasta sauces, barbecue, and of course we know ketchup, and salad dressings. Oh my goodness, salad dressings everywhere. So when it boils down to it, fructose isn't bad like petroleum-based products, but when it gets to large amounts and it's in everything, well, now too much of anything is not good. And it kind of reminds me, when we go to our best foods list, remember what I always try to teach us is we pick out our best sources of macronutrients, right? Proteins, carbs, fats. And even if it's fructose, so sugars from fruits, even then we're talking about portion is king. Portion control matters. And so even when we're looking at food additives and gosh, we're not sure and we think they're not too bad, the reality is if we have very small amounts of questionable ingredients, even if it's fructose, it's not nearly as bad as if it's in so many foods that we consume that now we've got too much of it. Okay, so again, old-fashioned food, no. Thyroid cancer is what is being connected to the red dye number 40. And scary. What it had said was the FDA recommended that we take red dye out. It should not be in foods. The convincing evidence made the FDA make that decision, and their recommendation was overruled by the cherry industry. So how come the cherry industry gets to decide what is or is not in the food products? Pretty scary, right? But the U.S. Department of Agriculture allows it in foods. So 1983, the convincing evidence of the red dye number 3 was also in process. So now we've got two colors or two different versions of red dye. And I still get people coming to Powerhouse Bakery wanting bright colors in their celebration cake and asking, do I do any all-natural colors? Because, they know a little bit about this. They might have heard that it might make over hyperactivity in children. And so they want, their cake to be super healthy, which, of course, they're going to come to Powerhouse for. But I warn them, yes, we can use beet. We can use beet red, but it's not going to look the same, right? And so that's why the scientists have figured out that our eyes want a certain color. We want bright red. We don't want just sort of red. Beets can sometimes be brownish red, right? If I did her cake and made the red beet red, she probably would be so unhappy and walk away and never get her cake because the color was not what she expected. And so often these little kids, and again, this perfect timing, this picture of this little girl, we are teaching her that eating a piece of, we'll say, bread with neon blue and green and pink is good. That's good. You want to like that. And so when the ice cream truck comes by and we get, the snow cones with all those bright colors, what's sad is that we inadvertently are helping our kids crave things that really should not be in our food resources. So, knowledge is power. And so we can go forward and try to teach our families that there are better choices. And so the fermented chow chow is really what I had next. And again, I'm very new at doing fermentation. I have a fabulous book that I've been studying a lot, and so I'm learning. But I've taught a lot about sourdough bread, and I've taught a lot about yogurts. Creating fermented foods from vegetables, I think, is so exciting, and it's got a lot of potential. You can go on YouTube and learn about fermenting and canning, the whole process of really cultivating your vegetables to be preserved on shelf for a long time, get the texture that you want, so whether it be crunchy or soft, more of a cooked texture versus one that's more like a pickle. So again, the food science that the food companies do really is part of the home cook. We've just kind of gotten away from it. And so I love the fact that now we really can get back to some of these principles and not have to worry about the dangerous chemicals. And even taking it a step further and knowing that doing some fermentation, because it creates all the really healthy bacteria, improves on our biome, and helps to get rid of some of the potential bad bacteria that's on the food. So to me, that's a win-win. So what I want to show you here is some of the basic ingredients in the chow chow. I mean, what I've learned is sky's the limit. You can use green tomatoes, you can use red tomatoes, you can do any variety of hot levels, red chili flakes or jalapeno. Interesting too, you can use different kinds of ways to adjust the amount of pH. And one I loved was, traditionally you use salt and sugar. So I did a 1-to-1 ratio of salt to sugar in about 2 pounds of cabbage. So 2 tablespoons, 2 tablespoons, and 2 pounds of cabbage. I kept reading though, and I found that for those that want to be really, more on the low salt version, and again, salt itself isn't really an issue. We know that most people, even if they have cardiovascular disease, aren't salt sensitive as much as they are eating inadequate vegetables that give you all the other electrolytes. So sodium is one thing, but if you don't have enough potassium and magnesium and calcium and phosphorus, that's when you start having issues with cardiovascular health. So, after saying that, I still came up with an idea to decrease the amount of salt in our chow chow by using seeds. So this is my seedy blend, and it's really one of my spices. It's a blend of fennel and coriander, fenugreek, black pepper, cumin seeds, and they actually help with the fermentation process. So I'm going to put about 2 teaspoons in there. Plus it adds more flavor. So if you know me, I'm always big on flavor. I want lots of interest and intrigue on my palate so that I'm not craving so much the food cocaine, which is high fat, high salt, high sugar, high crunch. And this one, fortunately, is going to have some fabulous crunch. So I'm going to use my hands and I'm going to crunch up the cabbage. And one of the criteria of making a chow chow or any fermented food is it has to sweat. So I'm not going to put any ingredient into this except for the natural waters or juices that come out of the vegetable. And I start with cabbage because it has a lot of great natural sugars and it's got a lot of juice coming out. So I'm going to pull this aside and you can see there's already a little bit pooling in the bottom. And so the process is the warmer the environment, the faster it will ferment. And then when you get to a point where you're kind of happy with it, putting it in the fridge will stop the fermentation process, and it even kind of neutralizes some of the saltiness. But you're not going to want to add any actual liquid to this. You can, and I'm going to show you an option when you're putting it in your jars. If it hasn't sweated enough, you probably would want to add a little bit more salt right on the top, again, to prevent the bad bacteria from growing. But for sure, it's an anaerobic bacteria that we want to prosper. So when I put it into those jars, I want to push it down and make sure there isn't any oxygen left, so that's anaerobic. And instead, it's got just the fermentation process that's happening from the vegetables. So all the veggies have sugars. So you know when I talk about the best foods list and we want to get lots of carbohydrates from vegetable sources, we know we're ultimately getting sugars. So I've done a good amount of crunching. It's not done yet. Usually it sits on the counter for, up to a day. And so we're going to cover it and make sure that it has a chance to finish its kind of development. If you've ever worked with any fermentation or even had a kombucha and you've heard of the mother, it's really the kind of the ball, if you will, or the bulk of the healthy bacteria. So sometimes it'll look kind of cloudy, and that's fine. That's exactly what it's supposed to do, and that's just the bacteria developing, the healthy bacteria developing in the sugars. So now I've added some tomato, I've added some tomatillo, some peppers. I'm going to add some red onion. So do I need to have any red number 5 or even red number 40? No, I don't have to add anything because my vegetables are going to be full of color. So I'm going to mix those around.
Did you already add the salt and the sugar?
I did, yes ma'am. I let the fermentation get a little head start so you could see all the juices. That sweating is kind of important so that we can see it from start to finish. But I just love the color. Red cabbage would be absolutely gorgeous in this. Now we do something similar at Powerhouse. We do the sriracha cabbage, and instead of it being fermented, we pickle it. We use a rice vinegar and a apple cider vinegar and a little bit of honey, and so it's close, and I suppose it could eventually be fermented, but this one is really developing all on its own. So notice too, I'm going to add in a bay leaf, and I learned that the bay leaf is really cool because it does impart the tannins, which help to kind of temper the sodium content, so it keeps some of the crunchiness in the vegetable. Do you know of anything else that has tannins? Yes! And do you know another one? Wine. Wine would have tannins, and so you could add in wine vinegar if you wanted, or regular wine. It would give it a fantastic color. So I'm actually going to put my bay leaf right into my jar, just so I can make sure each of them has one. And a couple of the YouTubers, they kind of turned their nose up to a bay leaf because they didn't like the flavor, and I was like, I'm all about that bay leaf. I love the flavor. There's all different varieties. Most of you know I'm from California, and I tell you, the bay leaf totally reminds me of hiking outside because the eucalyptus trees grow everywhere, and it's just such a great memory. So what I'm going to do is fill these jars up, and I'm going to push all the liquid or all the cabbage mixture into the liquid and make sure that I get as much coverage as I can. Ooh, I almost forgot. I've got my garlic and jalapeno. So I know, right? Because that makes it taste so good. Like I said, there's so many different versions. Another one I watched had plenty of radish, which I'll probably put in, and of course the different colors. I didn't take the time to cut all these, but we absolutely could do that. And mixing them in very carefully, and I can already tell even more juice is coming. One lady early on from the other class asked why we were doing it by hand and why didn't we just use a spoon. And again, it's because we want to get all those juices that will help to create that anaerobic bacteria so that only those good bacteria can survive. Yeah, that looks really great. So now I'm going to put in some in each of my jars. So one of these YouTubers uses this method to kind of get all their extra veggies from the garden bottled up and given away as gifts. And I thought, wow, what a nice gift, because something that is made from scratch and kind of an old world philosophy to me is such a fun way to share knowledge. So I'm going to leave a little bit of room, and then over time I'm just going to add in as I press it down more. But see, notice I've got lots of airspace, which is what we don't want. And so then I'm going to press, keep pressing it down, and it'll take a little time. Actually, that's probably a little bit, yeah, that didn't fit quite well. I have a mortar and pestle that I think would work too, but you can see it's already getting the juices all inside there, and it's going to work beautifully. I did a video, gosh, I guess back in 2020 on how to make fermentation, and what I did really was I just covered the bowl. And of course you can do that. You can let it sit in the bowl and not have to put it right in the jars, as long as you cover it so that you let it, it's not going to be completely anaerobic, right? If I don't do it airtight, but you're minimizing the amount of exposure to the air. And I think that's probably plenty, as long as it's not too long. And so I'm going to put in now some more of the colors with this beautiful yellow. I don't know if I could even find green tomatoes, so the tomatillo was my kind of version of a green tomato. But you could absolutely do one with chayote squash and different zucchinis. I think that would be fabulous. So now I'm just going to put a layer of yellow right there in the center, and it will look so pretty in the jar. Any chop size is just fine. I think, imagining what application you would use it for is really how you decide how small do you want your dice. And, it's funny because we Texans are just really not used to using relishes like this. When I've taught this class in the past, people would say, well, what do you use it with? Where do you apply it, And so that's where I really love the idea of sharing this step away from jarred foods that we kind of let the food companies make all the decisions. Instead, we get to pick. And I lived with a French family right out of high school, and I remember picnics where we would have jars of things pulled out, and I didn't really know what was in there. Surprisingly, sometimes there are even things like escargot and garden fodder that has been bottled away and opened up. But what's so beautiful is that's part of that Mediterranean culture, that they don't go to the store like an H-E-B and have rows and rows of pickled things to pick from, but instead they have all these unusual flavors that have really just come from the homemaker's kitchen. And so different flavor combinations, and then you feel like you've got so many options. So as we kind of put together our best foods list, let's imagine where we might put these items instead of more traditional ones. So if we think of the world of condiments, that's kind of where I imagine some colors or some food additives might show up. I mean, obviously the junk food category, I think that point is well taken, but these are a little bit less obvious. So if we were to think of ketchup or mustard, relish, barbecue sauce. So this kind of sets us up for foods that are going to need more flavor, right? Things that are bright red, bright yellow, kind of greenish, and kind of that sublime smoky variety. In all these capacities, something that is rich in vegetables and crunchiness and flavor could be an easy substitution. Would you agree? Hopefully. So now let's start creating our best foods list. Because remember, I talk about the company that the food keeps. We talked about portion size. But if we go to best foods list, and we think of protein foods, and we think, how about ground beef, and maybe turkey, chicken, and fish. What are some typical things that we put with a burger? Bun, cheese, right? Yes. And so have you ever put a veggie combination on a burger? Yeah, it's kind of different, kind of good. It kind of falls in line with the relish idea. But if you think of it too, you can put the veggie mixture in the meat. And so we did that very same thing when we made our turkey burger. It wasn't fermented, and I'm going to try that, but we put all kinds of chopped vegetables into our turkey burger, and it became so popular because if the mentality is we want to get veggies everywhere we can, it starts making sense to put them in lots of different capacities. And so the company that the food keeps starts to change. And getting more veggies is so key. And we've even talked about fermentation helps the gut biome. Do you remember the acronym of the certain biome byproduct that we love about fermentation? IPA. I always think of that because it's just like the beer. Fermentation actually feeds the biome. It's another acid word, and the end result is this acronym, and it helps our immune system. So how cool is that now in our meats we can add a vegetable that's been fermented to absolutely help our immune system. Big immunity boost. Versus if we go to the aisles and we buy stuff, this is not even very pretty. I mean, look at the difference. And granted, it takes a little time, but a little bit of chopping and pressing. I'm going to get 12, maybe even more jars, and it's going to last for at least 5 months. So I'm going to let it sit on the counter for a day, and then I'm going to keep pressing it down, make sure that it's anaerobic, and then I'm going to, once I'm good with the texture of the vegetable, I'm going to put the lid on it and put it in the fridge, and that stops the fermentation process. And so then I've got this wonderful product that is full of vegetables where I know where they came from, and they're going to be loaded with not only the fermentation that gives me an immunity boost, but it's also going to have the phytochemicals from the veggies themselves. We know that bright colors, right, are super valuable for helping our body. And sometimes it's what it doesn't contain that makes it a healthy choice. And so, I'm sorry about this company, Mrs. Renfro, but honestly, the way she used to make it, I can promise you she didn't put red number 40 in it because it didn't exist. And nobody's going to have that in their home kitchen. So, they tried to fool us by putting, that expectation on the label. And really, the message, the take home is that we really can go back to that old style and gain so much more benefit by making our own fermented foods and not having to do chemicals and additives. So for the next few weeks, we're going to still focus on different food types. And I always want to bring it back to how do we apply it to our best foods list? How do we really think about how to use these things so we're not just, walking out of here going, okay, I guess she wants me to chop and prep and cook and buy jars now. Not necessarily. There's lots of companies that will gladly make really good ones for you, but now it's just our job to discover them and be really careful when we're reading labels. And again, there's lots of research that maybe has some differing outcomes or different opinions on the outcome, but to me, if there's a risk and we have a better option, the choice is easy. Okay, so I hope this has helped you. I can't wait to share some of my fermented veggies, and I'd love to give you a challenge. See if you can find a chow chow on the market that is just made with vegetables. So thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you guys next time.